My name is Kycell, and this 33rd chapter of the Forgotten Minotaur King stories the events that eventually lead to the destruction of the Mindas castle. After the departure of my companion and co-conspirator, Ahani, into the lower foundry of the castle, Chinook the Draconid and I continued on to the royal library to begin our duty scrying and transcribing written documents to expand the collection housed in our book room. After witnessing the terrifying declaration by Prince Dinge to the prisoner Oxor moments ago, we both walked in silence. I myself pondered what he meant by the diplomat was dead, and so were his soldiers. For a moment, I feared our operation was already compromised, that the Morongo Knights and Artois Valois, their lieutenant, had been discovered and executed before we could even launch our rescue of Merkine's son and the child's babysitter, Perna. Just before we opened the doors to our tower, Chinook grabbed my robes with his small, clawed hand.
Oh, by goodness, those knights hiding at the university have something fierce coming, don't they? Talk in the workers' bedchambers is that they're planning to flush them out this evening, and, like you heard, have a public execution tomorrow. Ooh, these new royals certainly pull no punches, do they, Kycell?
I was simultaneously relieved and shocked. The path was clear for our rescue, but Kind was still healing. Not to mention Nurse Estelize and Silaban might be in danger, given the disregard I've seen Prince Dinge have towards civilians. At this moment, my eyes surveyed the risen walls around the library tower. They bracketed the minuscule courtyard between the dungeon exit and our repository, and they stood near half as tall as the tower itself. I thought on how the knights planned to scale them, but as my eyes examined the top edges of the embankment, I surreptitiously noticed several small, gleaming hooks latched in to the surface of the wall. I felt relief once again and continued on, following Chinook into the library, where we were greeted by the fanged and pallid face of our master, Lord Natanus, Carnager, Half-Elven.
This way, gentlemen. We have much work to do this evening.
Hunched and mincing his jagged, black-nailed hands together, Lord Carnager glided across the bookroom's flooring elegantly, his head draped in a heavy hood, as it always seemed to be during the mornings. We followed him as he led us to the organized piles of reading materials I had brought back the day before. There were a pair of desks facing each other, the style of which I hadn't seen since childhood school days. These seemed made for someone around that age as well. Given his small stature, Chinook snugly sat in his. He likely had used it the day prior, when he began transcribing practice in my absence. The sudden dawning of a missed opportunity flooded my head so swiftly it nearly knocked me to my feet. This was the exact type of thing Ahani had literally gone to school to study. This would have been the perfect opportunity to pull her from the foundry work she was forced into by the taskmaster when we first arrived, simply due to her race. I felt a deep shame not realizing this sooner. I had little doubt her lack of actual magical skill to copy texts would have been an issue either. My sudden realization of my own stupidity must have shown upon my face, as Lord Carnager turned his partially shrouded face towards me.
Is something on your mind, young Master Coxie? You hadn't changed your mind on scrying these documents with the aid of my scrolls, have you?
I apologized in haste to Count Natanus, being sure to use his preferred title. I offered up a downplayed description of Ahani, being sure to refer to her by her code name during our infiltration of the castle, Norge. I told Carnager she was an experienced stenographer, and we met in town, but she was unfairly placed in the castle's blacksmithery, given her race. This was when Chinook looked up from his dozens of organized inkwells and quill pens and chimed in.
Oh, you mean that mule half-dwarf girl you always arrive with can read, let alone record information. Are you sure you're not simply trying to work with another one of your conquests, like that ratling you went into town with? This is a place of learning, not a sexnasium, you know.
Carnager stifled a dry, chalky laugh, but Chinook looked on with a seriously concerned expression. I assured them both, not only was I not seeing either girl, but yes, her skills would be of value. And while I am interested in Carnager's scrolls, I could be a greater help by collecting further information.
Very well. I'll evaluate your skills myself. In the meantime, please do have a look at my collection of scrolls. Eventually, I plan to have them also logged into the library's repertoire. Sans their magical properties, of course. Unless Master Chinook can greatly increase his own abilities. Come, Master Kycell.
As we left to a back room I hadn't noticed before, Chinook returned to his preparations, but with a stern look of determination burned into his dragon-like countenance. As I entered, the reason I never noticed this room before became apparent. The port I and Lord Carnager passed between was some sort of minor dimensional portal. While it appeared as a normal door in the wall of the library, the room itself was a dark, nebulous chamber, seemingly without walls or a ceiling. The floor was a glassy black material I was hesitant to tread upon. I followed Carnager's lead, but very closely. When we fully crossed the threshold, Carnager's posture suddenly became far straighter, and the mild creaks and snaps I heard as he moved disappeared completely. He finally removed his hood, and instead of the gaunt, pale face with burning yellow eyes that could melt one's soul, I was greeted with a youthful face that had shoulder-length black hair and a robust beard. Even Lord Natanus Carnager half-elven ears seemed to unsag upon whatever rejuvenating powers this place seemed to have.
Now, Master Coxie, these are my spare scrolls. I collected them in my youthful, adventurous days long past.
I was mildly taken aback by the difference in his tone, and almost didn't notice the sudden appearance of numerous scroll-packed shelves lining along the non-existent walls of this mysterious room. He elegantly walked, not glided, I noticed, among them, until he stopped at a row that looked no different than any other. Picking up a single sheath of the likely enchanted paper, he walked back over to me and outstretched his hand with a scroll.
This should suffice. Page-bound image. It should replicate any text from one surface to another. Of course, given your likely less than adept skill, the copy would only last a few months. Best save it for any potential shady marketplace practices, like the one I pointed out the other day. The bottled schneef, which is now on its way to the Prince's little Jadenistown project up north.
Lord Carnager raised his hand, a gesture likely to retreat the conjured shelves. Impulsively, I let slip a plea for him to halt. He simply turned his new, handsome face towards me. A knowing expression gleamed upon his bright yellow eyes.
You wish to peruse my collection? Well, since you have been such a good and loyal employee these last few days, I believe I can trust you. Feel free to even borrow a few, but I expect some remarkable results in your work in the future.
With that, he passed back to the doorway of the partially lit bookroom beyond this shadowy dimension. The closer he got to the port, the more his posture began to shrink, and his flowing hair grew grayer, then finally fell to the floor of the chamber and dissolved altogether. I looked on in discomfort, but resolved my composure and didn't recoil or look away. Finally, as he stepped through the door, leaving it ajar for me to leave when I wanted, he looked back to address me one last time.
Please take no more than 4 or 5 from my collection, and refrain from any scrolls deeper in the sanctum. They're likely to consume your flesh and soul, should you try to cast them. I'm off to check upon this half-dwarf friend of yours. I hope she's as beautiful as Chinook made her sound. When I return, we shall begin.
When he left my eyeline, I approached the nearest shelf and started perusing potential aids for my future research endeavors. The overly packed shelves seemed to be organized in difficulty of casting. Dredging up everything I could from my minor studies in mystical and linguistical arts, I started closest to the door. The first few I skimmed seemed to be about the difficulty of the ones I inherited from Dar, our deceased companion, and the elderly Fiolatov that tried helping him all those months ago. This was to say they were fairly basic and castable by nearly anyone. Most of these consisted of parlor tricks like producing small floating lights or materializing colored ink or crude pictures on a surface for a few moments. As I went deeper, I saw the likes of creating small traps of fire, ice, and electricity, not strong enough to kill a target, but certainly enough to get one arrested if they should be used upon an innocent. A few conjured weapons, not something I, nor Ahani, nor Myrink would likely need. Then further into his collection, near the shelf he pulled the page-bound image scroll from, I saw one that allowed the user to read minds for a limited time. Thinking of the research utility, I pocketed it into my robes. A little further down, I saw one that granted the ability to conjure a mind that had passed, a weaker or confined ghost, if you will, and ask it anything you desired. Another must-have for my journey going forward. I was further from the door than I planned at this time, having passed over scrolls that turned your skin to rock, water, steam, or lava. Others to teleport yourself or enemies thousands of feet, or else possibly through time. I considered this one, but managed to read a statement written on it, implying the time traversal was one way, before placing it back upon the shelf. I had no need to turn myself into a dragon or disintegrate any mortal being. But then I came across something wondrous. After settling on a mass invisibility scroll, I was ready to stick with the four I had chosen. Making my way back to the entrance, I spotted something among the intermediate difficulty-based shelves. The words "Paths Traveled" were written in an old caster's language. I was able to decipher that it could be applied to a map and used to follow the path of any subject, even a route taken decades ago. The historical aid this could offer was astounding. I put the scroll away, along with the others, and returned to the real library. For a moment I feared I would wither like Lord Carnager had upon leaving the room, but remembered that strange occurrence was likely due to him being some sort of vampire. Readying myself for his return, I came to the two desks he had set up for Chinook and myself. To my surprise, Chinook was not at his desk. He was by the doors, and intermittently pushing them and pulling them with all of his might, his tiny draconic wings beating with the effort.
Oh, by Cell, thank goodness. Lord Carnager said he was going to the foundry by the dungeon to retrieve that mole girl for you, but that was quite a while ago. Now I hear what sounds like a war outside, and the library door seemed magically sealed.
That was when I remembered. The attack, the rescue. I had made a huge mistake. Hi, my name is Matthew Lewis, and I do the voice of Kycell along with all the additional voices in The Forgotten Minotaur King. I hope you enjoy the podcast and continue to listen into the future. If you want to support my content, please donate to my Patreon, Matthew Lewis Podcasts. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, Matthew Lewis Podcasts, all one word. Follow me on Twitter at Matthew Lewis P. Or leave a positive maximum star review on your podcast app of choice. If you found this podcast, I assume you're familiar enough with the genre to know how important reviews are to the survival of a channel. And I hope you recommend this to your friends. Or if you didn't like it, you could recommend it to your enemies, and I'll teach them a lesson. Keep it sleazy, folks, and thank you.